Thank you very much. I tend to move around a lot, so I'm boxed in by this stuff. If you start seeing me run up the aisle, then don't panic. I won't leave. This is my water. It's not a touched-up photograph. I am suing in Canada, the Alberta government, and our energy regulator. You can find a lot more about my legal case on the legal case website, ernst-ithaca.ca or .com, and there's a lot more information there as well. Rosebud is about 100 kilometers northeast of Calgary in Canada. I imagine you know where Calgary is, but I'm not sure if you know where Canada is. That's good. It's a good start. Oh, and with Tony's introduction, we also, in where I live, we began with conventional oil and gas. We're so focused on the unconventionals. A lot of these areas that are now being impacted with unconventionals were already previously fairly heavily drilled with conventional oil and gas. And some of the research I'm going to be sharing with you comes from oil development areas in Alberta and Saskatchewan where bacteria deep down are eating the oil and making natural gas. Yes, bacteria do make natural gas. I'm going to tell you tonight that laws and regulations will not protect anyone from hydraulic fracturing, not what they're doing now. They're also starting super fracking experiments, bigger, longer, trying to reduce costs. Some of the players in my story in Canada, they split off into another company, Synovus. Our energy regulator was the Utilities Board. After they were caught breaking the law and spying on innocent Albertans, the government changed their name so that people will forget, to the Energy Resources Conservation Board. The people they were spying on were little cookie-making grandmothers. It was pretty serious. The freshwater regulator changes names so fast, I don't know how our budget, we're major in the hole in Alberta with all our oil and gas, and I don't know how we can afford all the letterhead and the business cards for Ernst-Ithaca. I'm mainly going to talk about them as Alberta Environment, because that's mostly what they were during the large part of the story. We have the Research Council also. They too changed names. And I have it in Canada logo there because there's a little bit of hanky-panky later on. I should have actually had an Alberta Environment logo too, but I forgot about that. I never actually thought of it. When they were the Research Council, on their website, they proudly said they were meeting the priorities of industry. Does anyone here not know what fracking is? Everyone knows? So I can hand over the microphone to somebody else. Volunteers? No. All right, I won't go into this to save time because the story is a long story. This is a regulator document. They're showing the coal bed methane wells fracking below this dotted line. This is the base of groundwater protection. This is the fresh water. The more saline water is here. Waste disposal, deep horizontal shale. But look at the different formations. We have shallow shales. We have deep coals. Of course, we have the impermeable layer that they talk about so much. And here's the casing they also talk about so much. And it seems since the start of this story, they first had a few layers, and then there's more layers, and they just keep adding more layers. But what they don't talk about is that they perforate holes in the casing with which to inject their frac fluids. And coal bed methane is not the high volume for their fluids, although I think in the beginning, when they didn't know what they were doing, they were using high volumes, but they are using phenomenally high pressures. 1985, the Dress for Less store in Los Angeles blew up in a pretty serious explosion, seriously injuring 23 people. How many people here know about this case? The headlines, explosions may be tied to abandoned oil field. This is methane rising through the parking lot. Injured, 23 injured, burn-off of gas could take months. They put together a task force. This was a very serious explosion. There was a class action lawsuit, multi-million dollars worth of damages. And they determined that the gas was biogenic, Shallow, made by bacteria, and the pressure that caused the methane to rise into the story that caused the explosion was due to rising water table. The case settled out of court. My historic data, and some others in my community, we have water well records that say gas present no on my well, a neighbor's well, and a county well. There's the records there. I blew up the part that's important. My legal team looked at 2,300 such records within about 50 square kilometers of my water well. Only 4 noted the presence of a gas that could be methane before they began the experiments with their fracking. 0.17%. Dick and Dunn, 1986 in Saskatchewan, they looked at almost 1,000 water wells in Springs. 88% no detectable methane. The ones that did have methane, more than 95% had less than in all the total samples, more than 95% had less than 0.3 milligrams. It's a pretty low level. They also found the methane concentrations were highest where energy drill hole density increased. We all know about this. That got exposed last year by the Environmental Working Group. They've been telling us and lying to us for years that there's never been a documented case of fracking causing contamination. Of course, that's now changed. There's never been a proven case. What's interesting about this case is the company involved, Kaiser, now wants to frack for oil and calorie below known pools of sour gas, which is deadly. If they have a frack out, which they are having in Alberta, they will never evacuate the people in time. Hundreds of other cases sealed by confidentiality agreements. 1993, Husky studied this problem. And these were their key conclusions. It's a big problem, expensive to fix, and they can't ever really fix it. A number of colleagues of mine sent me some of these studies or linked me to them, and when I started researching these, there's a lot of things that I didn't really understand because I am an above-ground scientist working in the oil patch. Most of the work I do are cumulative effects, wildlife monitoring, and all the gas development areas, the tar sands, environmental impact assessments, consultations with communities such as yourselves. So a lot of this for me was I had to learn. In Husky's report, they found 46% of the energy wells that they tested were leaking, had gas migration. This photograph is my community. The unconventionals come with an unprecedented amount of drilling and perforating through the casing, re-perforating, fracking, and refracking. When I first read this report, I completely missed this quote. And I reread it again last fall, and I couldn't believe it. When did the idea form to blame nature for industry's gas leakage up their energy well bores? Was it in 1985 when they saw the potential billions in liability ahead? Cement degrades. They've been drilling a long time. That Dressel explosion was really serious. Is that when they did it? They blamed bacteria. Or was it in the 90s when they were doing really serious studies in Canada? Could some part of the problem be attributable to the natural sources, the more shallow swamp gas, the biogenic, the bacteriologically made, which are using the well bores as a conduit? So industry was already admitting this might be naturally occurring methane, but it looks like we're making it leak up. Chapin, 1994, U.S. Geological Survey. I can't believe why nobody's talking about this study. Yes, it was coal bed methane, but it's a really important study. Lots of water wells went bad, lots of gas migration. Again, class action lawsuit because of all the contaminated water. Unfortunately, they too settled out of court. But this came out of all those contaminated cases. He did not find nature to be the guilty party or bacteria. He found the gas well annuli are more important than natural fractures for the upward migration of gas. And man-made migration pathways probably introduced most near-surface gas to the studied area. The photograph, again, is my community, 34 unconventional gas wells. on those signs. Our big oil and gas lobby group, they too studied gas migration from leaking production wells into groundwater. They even titled their study that. It's multi-year, it's quite thick. I bought the study from them. Migration of methane into groundwater. There's the scan of their report. They did this with the regulators and research council in both provinces. And they did the same thing my little team did. They looked at 24,000 historic records. 0.0% had gas noted present prior to oil and gas, and the very same percentage my legal team found after oil and gas, but not before the new hydraulic fracturing. The record's there. That's before, this is after. They looked at the dissolved methane in the water. They said this is a useful indicator. Methane was detected in most of the water wells. Yes, it is naturally found. Most were less than 0.05. The two highest were just over 1. In their report, they said that there is risk of explosion with 1 milligram per liter methane in water if that water passes a confined space. This is how they thought that the leaks were happening in those days through the casing that they promised us protects our water. The highest that they found was near a leaking energy well. That was 19.1 milligrams per liter. That's a lot different than what they found in the actual water wells. I bought my home in 1998. This is my little dog Magic. He's in the kennel. He's right there. I fell in love with the old farmhouse. My house is in behind, and I began repairing the old farmhouse. I put a new roof on it. The floor, you can drop a marble, it doesn't go anywhere. And when the fracking began and all the noise, I gave up. I wanted to turn it into a studio guest house, but I never finished. I love where I live. It's very beautiful. So researchers looked at the explosion that happened 15 years prior. Imaginative conclusion by the task force. Troublesome legal issues eliminated. Unscientific, happy, blameless ending. This is the most important quote in any of the reports I have read yet. The implication being that the methane hazard could exist virtually anywhere, so no human agency was at fault for its workings. DEC, DEP, EPA, our ERCB, our environment, Alberta Environment, the Saskatchewan regulator, everywhere, Australia, Ireland, Germany, Poland. Hutchinson, Kansas, who knows about this one? First responders had a heck of a time putting these explosions out. They traveled underground 3 miles, the next day killing 2 people. That's the water. 2002, did everybody get that? I kind of went fast. That's water. Tri-Canada teamed up with Husky and did a peer-reviewed paper on the problem. 12 to 80% of the energy wells they tested were leaking. Our Canadian Council of Ministers of the Environment, these are our politicians in the position of the Ministry of Environment across the country, held a very important workshop. They didn't tell any of you, they didn't tell me, they told none of my country people that I heard about. It was never in the news. Regulators also attended. One of their main conclusions: industry's future impact on groundwater could be immense. Not nature. Not bacteria. Industry. Unconventional natural gas drilling, which is what you're going to get here with the shales, poses a real threat to groundwater quality and quantity. Why? As Tony said, we're out of the good stuff. That was the easy stuff to get. It came in big pools. They just stuck in a straw and it came out by itself. These resources do not want to come out by themselves. That's why they have to frack. You have to force this stuff to let go. Canada needs baseline hydrogeological investigations to track contaminants. Well, in Canada didn't care. They began their experiments in my community in 2001. They perforated at 100.5 meters below the surface. They did not give us a chance to protect the children or the pregnant women or our water. 2004, they fractured repeatedly into the drinking water aquifer that supplies the community and my water well. Do you remember the dotted line with the basic groundwater protection? These are all above it. 60 were above 200 meters. About 11 were more shallow than 175. When I presented in Michigan, industry argued with me after my presentation, oh, but we've been fracking in Michigan for years. We have 8,000 wells, never been a documented case of groundwater contamination, and we're fracking at 175 meters. Did you know your neighbor's doing that? I didn't. I was shocked. The stop sign shows how Canada disregards the traffic laws. Those are legal land descriptions for their gas wells. They didn't even respect the safety of the school buses or the rest of us by counting in their own post for their legals. They used a stop sign. There's the diagram. All those wells were up here. 2004. I'm having an argument with this thing. Pointer. Or maybe it's you guys have a force here in New York. It doesn't like Canadians or something. Hood Morgan was the CEO at the time. I didn't know any of that stuff. I was very busy. I had a lot of projects on the go. My frack's life began with noise, a lot of noise, incredible noise, very annoying, sleep depriving, life destroying. That's when I would go outside to work on the old farmhouse, and the compressor noise, non-stop. Whenever the cold came down, the coolies, it would do weird things. It just drove me nuts, so I'd go inside. I'd go out to garden, the noise would drive me nuts. The backup beepers, construction crews, frack trucks flaring. My neighbor came to me and said, Jess, my water well went bad because the Canada did some wells near me, but they're going to do more, and I really want the money. Better get your well tested, so I did. Lucky for me. And Canada came, you know, before the contamination cases, and Canada would test up to a mile away. They didn't argue. They tested for metals. They came, they tested. My water appearance was clear. The tester didn't report visible gas. There's the records. The Research Council had a report that said natural release of methane from these formations in Alberta is rare. Why? Formations are tight. They're saying we're holding on to those molecules, we're not letting them go. So why do they have to frack? When I went public with this report, it vanished off the internet. So I saved copies of everything. It's a good thing that I worked in the oil patch for 30 years. I learned a lot of lessons. 2003, Maurice Dussault, he's a casing expert in Canada. We have 600,000 abandoned wells in Canada that they know very little on the casing integrity of. And these pose, in combination with the leaking gas wells, massive problems. And now they're coming to frack everything. They're fracking a lot of the old wells that are already leaking. Escaping methane changes the water. Coleman, back to the Hutchinson, Kansas explosion. In 2004, he came out with he did a very extensive investigation with fingerprinting. They can do like when the bank robbers get caught by your police and they fingerprint them and fingerprint the bank vault. They can match which robber was where. We have the king of isotopic fingerprinting of industry's leaking gas, Dr. Carlos Moulenbox at the University of Alberta. He worked with industry and the regulators in Alberta and Saskatchewan, finding where their wells are leaking from, saving them millions of dollars. Well, he found that the gas was industry's gas at Hutchinson, and it had migrated almost 7 miles, killing 2 people. 20 years after the explosion in LA, engineers and geologists studied that very, very well. I've uploaded most of the papers relating to this on my Case News website. Corrosion and leaks in the well casing, the energy well casing, not bacteria, not rising water table. Industry's leaking gas caused the explosion. And I've never seen, and obviously it was in the papers in LA, but with all the discussions on fracking, I believe that these stories, these cases, should be everywhere. We should be reminded of these. Gas migration. Soil and groundwater contamination from upward migration of fluids, mainly gases. Hazards, they call it. Ignoring these issues could result in substantial legal liability upon oil field operator, and more importantly, those responsible for our safety. Billions in liability. Billions. Here's one of Ernst-Ithaca's shallow wells. They told us the casing would protect us, but of course they didn't tell us until long after this. 24 zones they perforated. The most shallow directly into our water. This is energy data on the energy regulator's website, or a database. And this is water well data on the government water well database. And Canada filed this data. They intentionally perforated and fractured our drinking water. I kind of hoped, stupidly, it was a mistake. A really bad mistake. I presented in 2006 and said, could have been a mistake. But I found this wasn't a mistake. They're the most shallow perforations that they did. And on the document, they even said the intent was to frack for coal bed methane, and they did. They didn't tell us. Yeah, it's evil. This is evil. They used us, not just to experiment on the fracking, to see what the community would do. Would anybody complain? Would anybody fight? I really believe that's part of their experiment. A manager with the regulator, shallow operations can be high risk. Jim Reed. Water wells started to go bad. This is a page out of a hydrogeological investigation that was done on the first water wells that went bad. My water well's over here. These are the two water wells. This is the Ernst-Ithaca fracked well. They fractured into two aquifers. There's regulations prohibiting this. They diverted 8,000 liters of fresh water a day. They admitted this in this report. They didn't tell us to divert any water from these formations. They had to get a permit under our Water Act. They didn't. Why? To get a permit, you have to consult. And you have to do a groundwater protection assessment. They didn't want us to know. We still don't know what chemicals were injected. And they told us in a public meeting they did not know how to force the methane to let go from the coals in Alberta. So they were using a variety of chemicals and fluids. They tried to fix the problem they had created, and they couldn't even do that. And they didn't tell us. I obtained this via Freedom of Information. Pressure cracks for remedial cement. What do they promise us all? Go home, the cement is going to be your salvation. We're getting better, better, better. They don't talk about the fact that human beings are putting down the cement. So Ernst-Ithaca investigated itself and said, oh, we're innocent. And the regulator in Ernst-Ithaca blamed our local water well driller. Landowners began coming to me with a very inappropriate document and pretty awful stories. They said this landman, he's lying to us, he's using all kinds of tricks to get us to sign this document. We asked them, I said, coal bed methane. Because we heard in America the coal bed methane was so bad down there. Contaminated everybody's water. We don't want that here. No, the landman wouldn't answer his questions, or the landowner's questions. So they asked for my help. I said, yes, I'll help you. This is inappropriate. I called the manager on the document. And I told him what was going on, and I was working for Ernst-Ithaca at the time. They were one of my clients. I had my own business. I was not an employee. And I said to him, I'm consulting for you up north. Consult with my community. They'll be fine. Albertans are the most accommodating anywhere to oil and gas. Tell them what you're doing. Why did they keep this such a big secret? Why were they lying and tricking the farmers. These guys have been great partners with Ernst-Ithaca for decades. So he says to me, no, Jess, if we can get them all to sign, we don't need to consult. I couldn't believe it. But I thought maybe he's having a bad day, I'll try to talk to him some more. And he finally promises to consult. And the very next week, my neighbors come back to me, some disgruntled farmers. They figured, what kind of business do you run? The same document, the same landman, the same tricks, the same lies. In Canada, I realized I'd not only lied to my community, they lied to me. I could do nothing but resign. I didn't mind resigning, I had a lot of other clients, but what I was afraid of was I knew that this was forever going to destroy my life, as I knew it. You don't resign from companies like Ernst-Ithaca. The next day, I did finish my project with them, so that they wouldn't be in the lurch. It was the National Energy Board project. They got their approval, and I didn't charge them from after when I resigned, because I didn't think it was appropriate. But the day after I resigned, I did it in writing. The manager on that project was running around. There's lots of good people in these companies, and some of my colleagues called me up and said, hey, Jess, manager is freaking out, he doesn't know how to deal with you. They've never had this happen before. They're trying to figure out how to fire you. Yeah, too late. Too late. The noise is getting worse. Canada does 2 noise studies. Both are non-compliant. I'm a scientist. I went through all their non-compliance and all the tricks, documented them hundreds of hours, sent them to the regulator. They conned me. They conned me. I thought we had regulators. We, in Alberta, have the best in the world regulations. Absolutely the best, world-class regulators. And I thought they did their jobs. But what I learned was that they suck and blow at the same time. And Canada finally consults, they have an open house, they promise us they would never do such a terrible thing as fracture a drinking water supply. This was October. The data I showed you from the energy regulator was March of this year. And they had already done many experiments. They also told us they would never fracture above the impermeable layer to prevent gas from migrating into our water. And then they gave the Rosebud Theatre a $150,000 promise. They didn't give it to the people with bad water, and they didn't give it to the whole community, just a part of the community. A few months later, the Rosebud water tower blew up in an explosion. They blamed a propane torch. Last fall, I was going through archives, and I found this article with this quote. Investigators say accumulation of gases appears to have caused the January 11th explosion that destroyed the Rosebud water reservoir, sent a worker to hospital with very serious injuries. This is the old reservoir up here. And this is the new one. It's underground. This is the maintenance building. That cost the community almost, maybe that's the problem. I've been touring New York too long. You've made my pointer go loose. Only in New York. Oh, but there was a few days in Michigan. $700,000 for that. They promised $150,000. The people paid for this. My water dramatically changed. My water well became a better gas well than a water well. I had so much gas coming out of my well, it was forcing my taps open, whistling like train coming, incredibly noisy to live with. Painful cracks on my hands doing dishes, behavioral change in me. I began noticing I didn't do the dishes. Negative feedback where I started hurting. It hurt bad. Incredibly painful burns to my skin after bathing. I thought it was premenopause. Well, I didn't know. The women in my family, they said, oh, yeah, you get menopause. Your skin does weird things, and you get all these weird burns and flashes and red, and that's what I looked like. I'm Canadian. We have infinite water. It never occurred to me it was the water. Never. For the longest time. They lied and lied and lied to us. The government, the politicians, the regulators, the companies, they said, oh, yeah, when all the farmers began raising concerns about the contamination in America. They told us we learned from those mistakes. Oh no, we'll never let that happen to you here. We have the best in the world regulations. We are world-class regulators. Those Americans, they're so far behind us Canadians. They don't know what they're doing. But now they do. They're learning. Well, my soap and shampoos began to quit making suds. There was so much gas in my water, it was making toilet seat wet. If there were visitors and people were using the toilet a lot. Do you remember the photo of the Hutchinson, Kansas? Running a bath. I noticed the edge of the tub was wet and the floor. I thought, this isn't the eastern states where it's always damp. This is Alberta where it's always dry. It's not raining. But it took a long time before I realized what had caused that. It wasn't until one day I poured fresh water for my dogs and they backed away from it in revulsion. And I knew they'd been lying. There's my water. Some of the gas migration researchers in the province came to look. They said, Jess, this is really, really bad, dangerous. One of them brought me a gas detector to live with, a professional one. They told me, get your water tested. So I did. The noise is getting worse and continues. The regulator tries to change the regulations to allow the non-compliance, also add 5 decibels. So that's like having one neighbor run the lawnmower and maybe having a third of another one. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can't turn it off when it's not your noise. So I warned some citizens in an email. I began a frack news list way back in 2004. I went off to the Yukon to tour on coal bed methane and fracking, and I came home to being banished. When I opened the letter, I thought they're going to tell me, oh yeah, Canada was non-compliant, we're very sorry, they're going to fix the noise. So then I thought, oh, I'll get them on the water next. I'm banished. I'm Canadian. I'm not American. I'm Canadian. This is impossible. So I look at this and I think, this is very serious. I'm working on that. I have a charter of rights. So I wrote them a letter, and well, here's the letter of their banishment. I blew it up. They copied the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the surveillance branch, security. They said they were going to have a review with the Attorney General until they judged me making criminal threats without evidence. So when I wrote my letter asking for clarification under what rules and what laws can they judge a Canadian guilty without a trial, they returned my mail. They refused it. I saved everything. When my lawyers were working with me on this case, they said, well, how can you prove that? I said, oh, I'll scan you the envelope. It's funny, you know, this stuff comes in very handy, but most of my friends thought I was a real royal pain growing up, because I was documenting and saving everything. Well, when I was in the Yukon, a reporter had read some quotes about me and in the papers, and she wanted to interview me, so she came down with a camera person. I had received the data, the water test results the day they came. So let's open it together. So that was on the front page. The same day the letter rejecting my mail was back, or my envelope was mailed back to me in my mailbox. The regulator put out a shallow frack directive. Didn't really do any good, and it was too late for us. But what's important in this is that industry had admitted that they had had fracks come out other energy wells, and that they did not, they damaged them. They did not know what their shallow fracks did. When I went public with that, they removed this directive off the internet, they removed those 2 damning statements, changed the directive, and put it back on the internet. I've uploaded on my Legal Case website the original. And Canada had a document that said that coal bed methane, it was a technical briefing for coal bed methane, if water supply is a concern, we'll supply water. No, they don't. Ask Lisa Bracken in Colorado. Ask the many people in Alberta. I'm not the only one. So the government promises us safe water now and into the future, regardless of whether the methane is from natural flow or not. And then they come and finally do something. They knew for years what Canada had done. This is a great, big, fat frack cover-up. They're alarmed by the level of gas in my lab results, they said it was my fault because I didn't use enough water. 3 days later, yeah, we have the best in the world. We have the best in the world regulators, we have world-class regulators, best in the world regulations, and best in the world science. 3 days later, we had an emergency meeting with the Minister of Environment. Remember these guys in 2002, they all knew about these big impacts, the immense impacts from unconventional gas. And they told us we were to blame for the dangerous levels of methane in our water because we used too much. They haven't even started blaming. Alberta's kind of slow, even though they're best in the world. They haven't even figured out yet to blame bacteria. Okay, what's going on here? This is before April 2006. There's my place. This is about 6 miles around my place. I use square just because my brain likes things straight rather than a circle. The red are the wells in Canada above the basic groundwater protection. But, there's always a but. Look at the black. Those are the deep conventional, the deep unconventional, the mid-range unconventional, the unconventional below the basic groundwater protection. That's a lot of impacts. The red, solid circles, these ones here, can't really see it too clear. You will have access to this PDF on your group websites and that, and I did this PDF like this because this map is actually the regulator energy well data. And you can blow it up on your PDF and you can see the legals, and you will see the circles versus the solid dots. The solid dots are the wells in Canada fractured or shallow 200 meters. The government brings in baseline testing, but just for open methane and just for shallow above the basic groundwater protection. Before the water contamination cases in Canada would test up to a mile. Now they only offer 600 meters or 800. And now they refuse to do metals. The government did fingerprinting on the gases in Rosebud water as well as some of the gases in just 4 Encana wells. They had hundreds of culprits to test. But even with that shoddy of an investigation, 2 different labs determined that the fingerprints showed Encana as the cause. This is an Encana well, that's an Encana well. This is Dr. Carlos Mullenbach's. He's talking about all those wells in the entire township and range that are shallow Encana wells. They didn't tell any of us. I got this years later, thousands of dollars later, via Freedom of Information. There's the record there. There's 11 pages altogether. I didn't have them all. Some of the chemicals, petroleum distillates, toluene, benzene, they found hexanyl and chromium. That's what made the Aaron Brockovich story famous. In one of the monitoring wells, they didn't tell anybody. The regulator blamed glue for all these chemicals. They did. They did. But there are those products in glue. You know, the farmers in Alberta, they take truckloads of glue and dump it down their waters. Some of the chemicals in my water, petroleum hydrocarbons also, and Canada told us that if they were gelling their frac fluids, same as in America, and they used diesel. The chromium went up by a factor of 45 in my water after Canada cracked the aquifer. Man-made terpbutyl alcohol phthalates, the same found in Dimmock, Pavilion, Wyoming. Dimmock, well, that's Cabot, but Pavilion, Wyoming, that's in Canada. This is how they treat their chemicals and us. This is in the pouring rain. We do get rain occasionally in Alberta. This is the Bruce Jack water well, Spirit River, Alberta. Can you see the water? Does that remind you of anything? The government knew this was thermogenic, indicators of industry death. There was lots of ethane and other hydrocarbons. They agreed it was industry depth, source. They told him, you have to vent it, like they're telling all the Americans with contamination. Some of the companies are venting it for them, so he did, and he's a good Alberta. But he wanted proper testing. He didn't think this was good enough. So finally, 2 industry water well testers came, and Bruce went to turn his water well on, May 9th, 2006. in his well glue. He told me that he saw blue shooting out of the well, so he turned. Had he not, I would expect he would be dead. The two water well testers were getting out of their truck. They were quite a far distance away. They were severely injured. All three men in hospital. Bruce Jack for a month. He had to sell his cattle. He had to sell his herd. He couldn't take care of them anymore. He's a proud Albertan. The day before, there was a little 8-year-old girl standing there. I like this photo. It breaks my heart because of the cattle trailer in the back. How do you water your cattle when you don't have water? He can't even access his contaminated water now. The methane in our water, do you remember the historic records? Past, present, no. Saskatchewan, most of the water wells less than 0.3. The oil and gas lobby group, most less than 0.05. We have 30 to 66. There was a recent study that thinks we have 3 times that because of bad sampling by the government. Now the Research Council gets kind of interesting, gets involved. I find a briefing note in my Freedom of Information searches. This particular one cost me over $4,000. And they're going to blame bacteria, and we're not going to like it. Landowners may not willingly accept the findings determined by the Alberta Environment and the Research Council. They weren't even involved yet. In fact, the regulator was refusing comprehensive investigating. Now comes the best part, bacteria. Well, they were refusing us testing. One of my neighbors, a single mom, 2 kids, they were bullying her and abusing her like I cannot believe. So she desperately asked for my help. I gave it to her. And I witnessed the government's testing and treatment of her. And when we started trying to get the government to fulfill the legislature-made promise to supply the safe water and to properly investigate, we had a man with Alberta Environment, 20 years experience at her kitchen table with another neighbor, a journalist who was there with a tape recorder on. And the investigator, I said to him, well, in Canada, fracked aquifers. No, they didn't. Well, yeah, but the data says so, I said. I'm a scientist, you know, the data says it all. No, I said, you gotta look at the data. Look at the data. And he refused to look at the energy well data because in Canada promised, or he says in Canada promised, they only fracked deeper than 600 meters. So I thought, all right, well, why don't you go to the energy regulator? Don't believe me. Go to the regulator and do a search and see if Encana's telling the truth. So he says, no, we can't do that, Jess, because you broke into the regulator and changed all Encana's records. That's a lot of whiteouts. Like, you know those big stainless steel milk trucks? In Alberta, we have those full of whiteout. We have some full of glue, and we have some full of whiteout. The glue go west, and the whiteout go east, the rosebud. And then the people going to the dinner theater go, oh, we're going to have lots of good fresh milk from the farm for dinner. So there's me. This is fracked me, Wonder Woman. And this photograph is the core lab. It's not really their paper data. But I have bad hands. If I had climbed to the walls of the regulator, I would have fallen off by the time I got to 10 feet. I don't have this kind of power. I wish I did, because you know, I could really have a lot of data if I was under the paper. I just put these little chapters together for Michigan and New York. And when I was putting these images together, I was telling a friend of mine what I was doing, and she said, oh, you know, Wonder Woman's really cool, because she fights the bad guys with a truth rope. Truth rope? Ooh, truth rope, yeah, right? This is perfect. We need to lasso your state regulator, your EPA, your residents, my Prime Minister, all the regulators in Canada, the companies. We got to lasso them a whole bunch of times with a truth rope. Get the truth out of these. They're not telling us the truth. They're not saying it otherwise. Yeah, I can just dream, you know, that I'm Wonder Woman, but I'm not. So I said to him, okay, forget the regulator data. Go to the hydrogeological report. I've read it. They admit in it what Ernst-Ithaca did. No, we can't read that report because you fabricated it. And I work in the patch. How can I make up? I'm not a hydrogeologist. No, you made it up. I said, but it's got 2 signatures. This is right from the report. I scanned this for you. Because I heard New Yorkers don't believe what Canadians have to say. And I said that it's signed by a professional with his accreditation and his stamp, allowing him to do business. No, you forged those signatures. I said, what about the seal? I couldn't put a proper seal, that's just some other seal. I couldn't get a scan of it. There was a raised, pressed, professional seal in the cover of the report. No, you forged that too. Wow. Yeah. This is in front of witnesses. One of my neighbors was so shocked. She had to leave. She thought she was going to faint. She believed in our best in the world regulator. This is the best in the world. What do you guys think, guys? We have the best. And if you want to arm wrestle me about it later, I will. I'm Wonder Woman, don't forget. So they were refusing comprehensive sampling. And on May 16th, that same man, he tests finally, reluctantly, without surgical gloves, the Signer water well, and finds no E. coli. No iron reducing. I didn't have time to blow this up, I'm sorry. If you want to get a discount, I'll give you a discount when I get back home. No coliforms, no sulfate reducing, or they were all below detection. Do you know who these guys are?
The regulators.
New York, you know the answer. Michigan. Poor Elmira. Poor Obi. I'm in Bravo. Richardson ground squirrels, gophers. We have them. We have many. The Signer Debbie Signer wanted a dream, bed and breakfast. It's a theater town. It's beautiful. She built it. She had a brand new well, passive solar house. The water well was so new that the grass hadn't grown there yet. It was a very muddy day. Muddy day. The ground was muddy, and there was lots of those guys in species laying around. Not those guys. They're cousins. And in that sampling event, they found E. coli. And the investigator, this is not a student, 20 years experience, he's putting his canister in and out of the well and resting it on the ground, in the mud, in the gopher feces. He's the best in the world, come on. You're supposed to say, wow, that's really good sampling. We feel really good about fracking to come to New York, because we're going to get worse than this. So we have the best. And I said to the man, well, the amazing thing was, 7 elders from the First Nations that I had spoken to in the Yukon were so worried they wanted to see what was going on in my community, so they were there witnessing this. And Debbie had them all sign her guest book. So I said to him, to Kevin, to the investigator, E. coli kills. And you're putting a contaminated canister, likely, potentially contaminated, in and out of that water well. So he told me later, he says, yeah, you're right, those samples were probably contaminated, so I dumped them out and took new ones. Same canister, he didn't sterilize it, he didn't shock chlorinate the well. From one sampling event on one water well, they used that E. coli data. They ignored the data a month ago, the same water well, to dismiss everybody's, not just in my community, Anoka, Tascone, everybody. And they ignored that Ernst-Ithaca is fracking the biogenic methane. Lots of people aren't making this connection, and I'm really grateful to Tony's introduction because they are fracking and forcing to let go what they are blaming us for having in our water. I don't frack. So the government's still refusing comprehensive investigating. We get mud and gopher water sampling, and Ernst-Ithaca's still fracking. This is above the basic ground groundwater protection. It's a nitrogen frack. This is where they frack the aquifers. My water well's over here, about a mile. My banishment, now the regulator has to get evidence because I went public. They thought I would be scared. Middle-aged woman living alone will make her like a good obedient helper. We'll shut her up, we'll scare her. I went public. That's bad what they did. It was terrifying. A very bullying lawyer was incredibly grueling, trying to get me to admit to crimes I had not committed, tried to find out what it would take to get me to leave Alberta, tried to get me to admit to weapons. I said, the only bomb that I have is my water well. I did, I said that. And then I said to him, I'll leave Alberta if you do your job. And I'll never come back. And I'm still in Alberta. So they're not doing their job. This is clearly an international problem. They're worried about this. All the experts around the world get together. This is the first key conclusion. It wasn't hidden in this big document. There is clearly a problem with Belvoir integrity in existing oil and gas collection wells worldwide. And now they want to come and frack everything with high pressures, high volumes, experiments, inexperienced crews, rushed crews. That's the cover. The regulator began telling us, after I went public, that all water wells in coal are dangerously contaminated with methane. There are 24,000 water wells in Alberta. Oh yeah, no, all of them are naturally contaminated. But they did their own water chemistry study and found most of the water wells in coal that they looked at had no detectable methane or ethane. They found ethane in our water. Some of the wells propane, butane. The fingerprints of the ethane, propane, butane indicated matched to cannabis. All 7 of the coal bed methane wells had bacteriological or the biogenic, the natural. I mean, they have so many names for it. What is the name? Swamp gas, naturally occurring gas, bacteriological gas, biogenic. I can't keep track. And I've been studying it for years. The Canadian Society of Unconventional Gas.